Welcome, one and all. Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Apple. We are on the 18th day of the 10th month, Tevet 5779. Today's title of our class is, this is a doozer here, so you have to hang in there, the spiritual connection between Xmas and Hanukah. Spiritual connection between Xmas and Hanukah. I know that's a whooper of one, but we shall explain as we go on. Okay, if you ever notice in your calendar, most years these two holidays are around the same time of year. Sometimes they are exactly at the same time of year, but they're always around the same time of year. Is that coincidental, or is there something behind this? As we know, there's nothing that is coincidental, and we will see the spiritual message between the proximity of these two holidays. So we're going to take it away. Okay, we spoke about, in the past, we spoke about our sages connecting, spiritually connecting, physically and spiritually connecting two events. One was the kidnapping and raping of Dinah in the city of Nablus, Shechem. The other one was the holiday of Hanukah. The first similarity is we see that when Jacob was lax in fulfilling his oath to erect an altar and to give up a sacrifice of thanksgiving to God for saving him from the hands of Esau, his brother, and of course anointing the altar with oil. So when Jacob became lax, so he was punished with the kidnapping and raping of his daughter, which is not a pleasant experience for any person. On the other hand of the spectrum, we have, in the time of Hanukah, we have the Bach telling us that the reason why the Jewish people suffered decrees was due to the fact that the Jewish people became lax in the service of the temple, sacrifices, and everything that's connected to the temple service in Jerusalem, the Holy Temple, Temple Mount. What was the result? The result was there were many, many decrees by the Greeks particularly against the women of Israel. So that's our first and second stage. Third stage, similarities, is that the idea behind the people of Shechem, Nablus, was to assimilate. The reason why that they kidnapped and raped Dinah, and the reason why they wanted to unite with the Jewish people then, the idea says very clearly in the verses that they wanted to become one people. It says that twice, in fact. So the idea was to assimilate themselves and assimilate Israel into becoming one nation, removing the chosenness, specialness, the separatism of the Jewish people, and everyone is basically equal. There is no advantage for any ideology, for any Torah, we'll call it, and everyone is basically the same. On the spectrum of Hanukah, we have the same thing. The Greeks, the idea behind these decrees against the Jewish women was to assimilate the Jewish people, and they were doing a very, very good job of it. In fact, Nachmanides writes that if not for the Hashmonaim, not for the Maccabees, the Torah would have been forgotten in that during that period of history. It's an amazing thing. The Torah would have been forgotten. The Hellenism was taking over, really, the Jewish people. So that is also similar. Number 4 is the people of Shechem Nablus, they wanted to uproot the name of Israel, to assimilate the Jewish people and uproot the name of Israel. We see this by the fact that 4 times surrounding the event of the kidnapping and raping of Dinah in the city of Shechem, we see 4 times that the term, for the first time in the Torah, first time we hear the term used of Israel. It's the first time we hear that terminology, and it's not by coincidence, not by accident. That was the idea. The idea was to uproot the name of Israel and to create a one nation, a one people, one humanity. There is no preference, there is no difference between people, there is no difference between ideologies or beliefs. We'll all become part of the human community. On the side of Hanukah, exactly the same thing. We mentioned previously that if you look at the prayer in the Amidah benediction, in the morning, afternoon, evening prayers, you will see a big difference between the holiday of Purim and the holiday of Hanukah. During the time of Hanukah, it says 3 times, it says there, uses an expression of Israel, Israel, my children. Whereas in Purim does not use that expression at all. Why? The idea behind the campaign of the Greeks against the Jewish people, the idea was, number 1, to erase the name of Israel from the Jewish people, and they claimed to be the new Israel. So the church, or Christians who claim today, not saying today, but in the last, hundreds of years, to be the new Israel, this was really stolen, hijacked from the Greeks, who claimed that they were the new Israel. So that was the idea. The idea in Nablus was to uproot the name of Israel, and that's why it appears 4 times around that area of the kidnapping in those verses, right around 4 times. For the first time, 4 times. And that's why the same exact scenario is being played out at the time of Hanukah, where the Greeks are trying to uproot the name of Israel, and not only uproot it, but use it for themselves. Okay, the next stage was called relations. If you look at the people of Shechem, in Nablus, with the kidnapping and rape of Dinah, they were interested in having relations with the family of Jacob, with the women, daughters, granddaughters, etc. That was their interest. Now this is very interesting because of the fact that if we see right before Dinah is kidnapped and raped, we have a very interesting scene where Jacob fights the angel of Esav, and he's victorious. He's victorious all night, but when the light of dawn hits, Jacob is injured, which means there's some kind of downfall here. The downfall was in the area of the circumcision. It says in the Torah that he was limping. He was injured in the thigh area. Thigh area is a clean expression, is a modest expression, there we go, to say the place of the circumcision. What does that represent? That means that the angel of Esav understood very well that fighting the Jewish people was unsuccessful. However, to start relations with the Jewish people, now of course, relations do not begin with sexual relations. However, that area of the body, it represents a connecting force. It represents relations. So relations begin first just, innocently talking, and then going and having coffee together, or going out for dinner together, inviting people to your house, being invited to their house. It begins slowly until the floodgates are wide open, and eventually that's what it leads to. So this is an amazing concept. Right before the story of Dinah being raped and kidnapped by the people of Shechem, by the people of Nablus, we have a very clear message that Jacob received. Be very, very careful to start relations with the nations, okay, with the nations of the world. That was a very, very clear message. And amazingly, right after he leaves that scenario, boom, it happens to him right away. It happens to him right away. And there's a reason, which we're not going to get into right now, that there was an attempt by Dinah to join forces on some level. Once again, she's a righteous person, so it's microscopic. But still, there was, as our sages tell us, there was a desire on the part of Dinah to connect with the daughters of Nablus, daughters of Shechem. So Jacob receives a warning, and right away, when we're not careful, and we begin coming closer to the nations of the world, therefore that's when we get hit. And Jacob was hit pretty bad with the story of his daughter being kidnapped and raped. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the same exact thing happening with the times of Hanukah, that the Greeks were using the Jewish people were presented with all these decrees. Many of them had to do with relations with the Jewish people, specifically women. So we have the same exact result in both cases. Okay. The next stage here is, I think we're on stage number 5 here. We have in the city of Shechem, Nablus, we have Shimon and Levi, 2 sons of Jacob, that get up and they bring their other brothers, etc., and they go out to avenge what was done to their sister Dinah, the raping of their sister. And miraculously, they are able to defeat an entire city. It's an amazing achievement. Let's look at the story about Hanukah. Once again, we will see the same idea of a minority going up against a superpower and being victorious. Where does that happen? It was the wedding of Hannah, the daughter of Matityahu, and as was the law for the last 3.8 years, every Jewish bride, before she was allowed to get married, she would have to be defiled by governmental officials by the Greeks. So this was a party before the wedding of the daughter of Matityahu. Her name was Hannah, and during this party, all our sages tell us that all the great leaders of the Jewish people were there because Matityahu was an important figure in the Jewish community. So all of them came to attend this party before the wedding. And at this party, Hannah, she begins to roll up her sleeves, which is not very modest. And in fact, her 5 brothers wanted to kill her because it was such an embarrassment to the whole, to the whole family, etc. And then she calls a timeout, Hannah, and says, listen, I don't understand. For the last 3.5 years plus, you've kept quiet. We've had these decrees against the Jewish people, against women. You have no problem with this. When I roll up my sleeve a little bit, you're all of a sudden, you have tremendous amount of courage and you're brave against little me. Why aren't you brave against our enemies? You're brave against Jews. Why aren't you brave against the enemies? And then he turned to her and said, listen, but we're a small minority. And she looked at them and said, don't you remember, there were in the city of Shechem, Nablus, there were two people, not five like yourselves, Shimon and Levi. Don't you remember? They went out to sanctify God's name. They went out to fight in the name of the one God, and they were victorious. So why don't you learn from them? So it's an amazing comparison here. Whatever happened in the city of Shechem with the sons and of Jacob and Dinah, everything is exactly the same scenario when it comes to the time of Hanukah. That's why our sages put one and one together. So listen to, once she said those words about Shimon and Levi fighting and to sanctify God's name and fighting for the oneness of God, they agreed and they went out and revolted against the Greeks. This is a very, very important factor, because there was, up until then, for the last 3.5 years, there was a dispute amongst the leaders of the generation. Were the women supposed to sacrifice their lives to fight against being defiled, or did they have to surrender and give in? Because of the fact that if somebody coerces a Jew because they're into receiving some kind of pleasure, usually the law is that you have to surrender and you have to do what they're asking for, whatever they're requesting, in order to live. Because one of the commandments of the Torah is that you should live. You should live by the Torah and not necessarily die. Of course, there's exceptions to the rules. So there was many opinion at that time of Hanukah. Fact is that for 3.5 years, there was no women were giving their lives up. They would rather take their own lives instead of being defiled. So this is very interesting, because the daughter of Matityahu, she gets up there and she explains why Shimon and Levi fought. This is an amazing point. She expressed the truth that the battle of Shechem, Nablus, is the same battle here against the Greeks, and it is not. It's not a situation where people, the Greeks, the government, they're into receiving sexual benefit from the Jewish women. They're also into that, but she understood what most people didn't understand. What most of the leaders of the generation didn't understand, that this was not a simple, regular case of a person that was looking for a good time, and they have their people that they have their good time with. This was a decree against the oneness of God. This was a desecration of God's name. It was a part of a religious war against the Jewish people. Once she said that, once she explained that was the motive of Shimon and Levi in the city of Shechem, and by the way, there was that same argument between Jacob and the two sons. Jacob looked at it more of as a desire for having relations. He didn't look at it as something religious or something, a spiritual war that was going on here. The brothers, however, did look at it in that fashion. They understood that the true motives behind the kidnapping and rape of their sister was religiously motivated. So it's an amazing thing. So once that was understood, the Jews in the time of Hanukah went out and revolted against the Greeks. Next point. We see that the Shimon and Levi were successful, even though they were a minority, against the superpower, the city of Shechem. Now we should know, according to the book Sefer HaYashar, the book of the righteous, it says there that this was not only one war. It wasn't we finish one deal and then we go home. There were a few wars that the Jewish people faced because of the fact that they stood up and avenged the defilement of their sister and the desecration of God's name. This was a domino reaction by other nations in the area that came to attack the Jewish people. So it wasn't like, okay, we got lucky one time, we were the minority, they were the majority, they're the superpower, we got lucky once. You could get lucky once. But this was 2 and 3 times. Look it up in the Sefer HaYashar, the book of the righteous, and it tells the different wars that they faced. An amazing thing. Now, very interesting, because of course we know that in our prayers for Hanukah, what do we say? Thank you, Hashem, for giving over to us you set up the victory of the few against the many. Now, if you look at the discussion between Jacob and his sons, what was Jacob worried about? Jacob's worried, he uses the words that I'm a minority. It's an amazing thing. We have the same story during Hanukah, where the Jewish people are a minority, and they go out and they're victorious. The same thing. Jacob was afraid that the reaction, the vengeance that is children perpetrated against Nablus, that would cause a reaction, which it did, to the nations that were surrounding the city of Shechem, Nablus, and it did. But the idea here is that these two events are really one event, and the idea is that if you trust in God, then God delivers the mighty and the superpowers and the many into the hands of the few and the weak, relatively. Okay, next stage, same exact story. We have Jacob goes to the city of Beit El after this war that took place in Nablus. He goes and he erects a Thanksgiving altar, sacrifices animals there, and anoints with oil the altar in the city of Beit El like he had promised 36 years ago when he was running away from his brother. So 36 years passed, now he's doing it. Now we look in the story. Let's move over to the story of Hanukah. What did they do? Once they were victorious, just like the Jews in the city of Shechem, Nablus were victorious, once the Jewish people in the time of the Greek exile, once they were victorious, what did they do? Once again, they rededicated the service in the temple, exactly what Jacob did. And what happened? In both cases, there were tremendous miracles. With what? With oil. Jacob uses an oil, which we will discuss, what's special about Jacob's oil, when he, after 36 years, when he's able to finally to perform what he had promised, his oath that he had promised, he pours upon the altar a certain miraculous oil. And of course, in the time of Hanukah, we had the miraculous oil, which lasted, instead of 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. So, okay, to our question, is there a similarity between what happened in the city of Shechem, Nablus, and the kidnapping and rape of Dinah and the story of Hanukah? Our sages say yes, and we've expanded and to explain how that is. Okay, now, the next part is right after this event in Shechem, in Nablus, the oil comes to fruition. We have the oil being anointed on the altar. In the time of Hanukah, we have oil being the first service that the Jewish people rededicate after being thrown out of the temple. The first service was the erection of the candelabra, the menorah, and lighting up the candles. So we have the oil. Now we have to understand there's a tremendous story behind oil. There's a tremendous lesson behind the events that took place, the tragic events that took place in Shechem, Nablus, kidnapping of Dinah, and the raping of Dinah, and the events of Hanukah. There's a tremendous message that we will understand shortly. Okay, so I will give the summary of this oil. Jacob, 36 years before, he runs away from his brother. His brother wants to kill him. Okay, he's running away. He goes to sleep one night in the city of Beit El, not too far away from here, and he has the dream of the ladder. Okay, and when he gets up in the morning, he erects a sacrifice, an altar, and then he pours oil. Where did he get that oil from? So our sages tell us an amazing thing. Our sages tell us an amazing thing. That it's written in Breshit Rabbah 69:8. It says, where did he have oil from? We know that right before this dream, Jacob's nephew Eliphaz came, and he was commanded by his father Esau to kill Jacob. But he loves his uncle. He really doesn't want to do it, but he wants to honor his father. So Jacob says, listen, I have a great idea here. I have a great program here. Solution to the problem. If a person doesn't have any money, he's considered to be poor. And if you're poor, you're considered to be dead. So you could honestly go back and tell your father, you take all my money, which he did. He took all his clothes. He left him with a stick. He left them with a stick to walk with. You know, just like today you see people are hiking, they have this, you know, sticks that they walk with today, walking sticks. When I was a kid, you have a walking stick, you had to be over like 80 years old. Today, you know, you see people 17, 18 years old with these walking sticks. So, he doesn't have anything left. He has nothing. In fact, Eliphaz took even his clothes. There's a whole story how he got clothes, not for right now. But he doesn't have any oil. So that's why our sages tell us, in Breshit Rabbah 69:8, tells us that God performed a miracle, and oil came down, miraculous oil came down to Jacob while he was sleeping. So now Jacob has oil. Now what's special about this oil, this is an amazing oil. This oil never finished. You know, you wish you had a car like that. You know, when you finish your gas, it just like fills up by itself and you don't have to pay the money. You don't have to pay Iran or all these Arab, Middle Eastern countries for their services. So this was an amazing oil. This is brought down in the Shach on the Torah, right at the portion of the week of Vayetze. This is brought down in many, many books. That this oil never ended. And it was miraculous oil. So that's how Jacob had oil when he was running away from his brother. He just began his journey, which would take 36 years. And so we have this miraculous oil. That was the first step. Second step, we said it was a miracle. Now, right before Jacob meets up with Esau after 36 years where he hasn't seen him, he remembers that he forgot a jug of oil, this special miraculous oil. He remembered that he had forgotten it. So now he sets up his family on the west bank of the Jordan River, and he says, I'm going back to the east bank of the Jordan River in order to get that jug. What, are you nuts? This is an amazing thing, because we know that even if a person is a righteous person, you are not supposed to travel alone. And in fact, it says in the Talmud in Chulin, page 91, side first, that even a righteous person is not allowed to be alone, to go out by himself at night, because the night is a dangerous time. People, you know, all the crooks and all the robbers and the murderers, they all wait for the night, so they have the cover of the darkness. This is also not just a line in the Talmud. This is brought down as law, as Jewish law by Maimonides, for example, in the laws of Deot 5, chapter 5, law 10. So Jacob is taking a big risk over here. He's going against a certain Jewish law that a person should not endanger themselves and run around by themselves when it comes at night. What was so important? What was so important to Jacob? Because this was miraculous oil. So this is brought down. This is brought down in the following books. It's brought down in a couple. I'm just going to give two. This is brought down in the holy book Megaleh Mukot on the portion of the week of Vayishlach. This is brought down by the Marshal and the Tzeidah Derech. So those are three that are bringing this idea. What was the idea? The idea is that Jacob understood that this oil was, there was a need to go back and endanger himself, because this oil would be around for the times of the miracles of Hanukah. This oil would save the Jewish people in the times of Hanukah. Now what does that mean? It sounds like so bizarre. We have Jacob here. We're talking about an event. We're talking about an event that's 1,200 years later. What in the world is he thinking about? Oh, you know this miraculous oil that I had? That I received from God? And it always fills itself up? You know, Jacob, he learned for 14 years in yeshiva, didn't sleep. Not that he didn't sleep, but he never went into a bed or put on his pajamas. He would like put his head down at the table or some uncomfortable position. But so how was he? There's no electricity there. He had this miraculous oil. So this oil, he knew that this oil would be around for the miracle, the time of Hanukkah. What does that mean? It means tremendous. It's a tremendous lesson. Jacob understands that oil represents the secret of the survival of the Jewish people amongst the hostile nations, or sometimes loving nations, quote unquote, of the world. He understood what our sages tell us, that the Jewish people are compared to oil. Just like oil, if you put in any other liquid, doesn't matter. It will never jive. It will never come together with other liquids. It always stays, number one, on top and first place, and number two, it always stands separate. So Jacob understood right now that he realizes that for the last 20 years when he was at his father-in-law's house, who was a tremendous wicked person, okay, Lavan, he realizes, as our sages tell us, that Jacob says, when he comes back to the land of Israel, that even though my father-in-law tried to destroy me spiritually, I am wholesome. I observed all the 613 commandments when I was at the White House, the house of Lavan. Who cares about the fact that you observe the commandments? No, it's important. How was he able? Jacob, now he's in a situation after spending 14 years segregated in a Jewish institution of learning, in a yeshiva. Now he comes to the big world. Now he's in the world of the White House, the world of Lavan, these wicked people. How's he going to survive spiritually? You know how he does it? He has this oil with him. Right, we said when he runs away from his brother, before he comes to the White House, before he comes to the house of Lavan, where he marries Rachel and Leah, this is before he receives a miraculous oil. And the lesson is very, very clear, that if you want to survive in the White House, and if you want to survive within the nations of the world, that sometimes come to us with force, via war, and sometimes they come as our friend, as a brother, with a smile, with the light of dawn. So this was the way to stay alive spiritually. Therefore, Jacob understands the importance of this oil, and he's willing to endanger himself. And he goes by himself to get that oil because he understands that this oil represents the Jewish people separating themselves from the nations of the world, and this will be the saving light. So he's willing to sacrifice himself, endanger himself, in order to save the Jewish people physically and spiritually by the lesson of the oil. And that's why he does, that's why he endangers himself. So that is the same idea. That's what the Torah is telling us when Jacob went back, because he understood that this oil would be used also in Hanukah. What does that mean? It means the same lesson. In the times of Hanukah, the Jewish people faced spiritual annihilation. What was the answer? The answer of the Maccabees, the answer of God, was the oil. In order to make it, in order to survive, these Maccabees, they saved the Jewish people from being totally assimilated. The Torah would have been finished, finito, la cameria. They saved the Jewish people. Nachmanides writes. And it's all behind the idea of the oil, of remaining, for the Jewish people to remain a separate, holy nation. That's represented by the oil. Okay. Now, very interesting. We have the 7 special species that the land of Israel was blessed with. Figs, dates, pomegranates, wheat, barley, olives. We have 7. And according to the inner secrets of the Torah, each one of the 7 special species that the land of Israel was blessed is connected to a spiritual light in the world. We have 7 spiritual realms of the world, according to the Kabbalah. Now, it's unbelievable. If you look at the olive is considered to be number 6. The 6th spiritual realm of the world is called the Yesod, which connects to the sexual health of a Jew, which means modesty, which means that a person, when it comes to this realm of the circumcision, which the Yesod is also connected to the circumcision, which means that the Jewish people concentrate on being a holy nation when it comes to be modest, and when it comes to sexuality, we have many spiritual laws that we must upkeep. So this is an amazing thing. Jacob endangers himself for oil. In the times of Hanukah, the Jewish people, what they find is a miracle with the oil. What's the message here? The message here is that this oil in Torah, represents the 6th spiritual realm. The fruit, the olive, is connected to the 6th spiritual realm, which is the Yesod, which connects us even back further. We know that in the time of Noah, when Noah suspects that it could be that the flood is over, close to a year, the flood, they were in the ark, and he has a feeling that perhaps it's over. Eventually he sends a dove to find out what the situation. The dove comes back. He comes back with an olive branch in his mouth. What does that mean? This is an amazing lesson. Listen closely. We know that the sin, Noah sends out a dove in order, not that he had intentions of leaving without the permission of God. He had no intentions of leaving without permission of God. But he wanted to check, he wanted to see if the sin of the generation of the flood, what brought the flood upon the generation, the number 1 sin came to sexual sexual sinning, transgressions. What was going on at this time? An amazing thing. People were not keeping, not only people, but also the animal kingdom. Instead of keeping within themselves cats with cats and reproducing, or donkeys with donkeys, horses with horses, even the animal kingdom was affected due to the fact that the human, mankind, once the mankind began to transgress the laws of modesty when it comes to sexual behavior, instead of men going with women and women going with men, we had a situation where they stopped. They began to transgress and not listening to God. And men began to have relations with men, and women began to have relations with women. And animals of different breeds began to have, instead of staying amongst themselves, they too, just like a man and a woman, they are considered to be one union. They threw that into the garbage can, and instead of men and women, they started men with men, women with women. They did not separate themselves from this illegal action. And they began, a person that was married, he had relations with other women that they was not married to. So everybody, instead of staying segregated, they're uniting amongst themselves. They're passing the borders of what is permissible. So this is an amazing thing. So that's what Noach is checking. He wants to check to see if the sin of the generation has been fixed. So what does he do? So he sends this dove, and the dove comes back with an olive branch. It's an amazing thing. What in the world? Why is there an olive branch? If there was a flood for 12 months, everything was destroyed, atop, up, below, how in the world is there an olive branch? So there's an amazing Gemara, the Yerushalmi, in the tractate of Kilayim, first chapter, law number 7. Amazing thing. It says that the Jewish people are likened to the olive tree, to olives. That our success is dependent on the Jewish people separating themselves from the nations of the world. That's why we are likened, similar to an olive, to oil, and to the olive tree. And therefore, in the book Ein Yaakov, he says an amazing concept. He said that all the trees were destroyed, except for one tree. One tree was not destroyed. Which tree was that? The olive tree. Why is that? Because of the fact that the Talmud tells us that there is one tree that you cannot crossbreed with it. You cannot crossbreed, and that is the olive tree. It's an amazing thing. That is exactly the idea. The olive tree stays within the olive family. It does not, you cannot crossbreed it. It's not like an apricot or a plum or all kinds of different fruit trees which you can crossbreed. But the Talmud tells us an amazing thing. I've come up to many gardeners and asked them this. They tell me, for sure, that's the way it is. That's what the olive tree represents. So when Noach sends the dove is able to bring a branch from an olive tree. How in the world did it survive 12 months of being underwater? It should have been destroyed. No, there was one tree that was not destroyed. Why? Because it represented the fact that it always kept amongst its own and did not crossbreed. It kept separate from all other species. So therefore it was saved. Therefore it was saved. Amazing thing. Next concept is that Noach, besides for the olive tree, which cannot be crossbreed, and that was a sign, once Noah saw that the olive trees were still in existence, they had not been destroyed, he understood, plus the fact, he understood that the transgression, the sexual transgressions that were taking place with different species, different breeds having relations which were forbidden, he understood that the transgression had been fixed. And therefore, we could now leave the ark. But it's very interesting. He had many, many types of birds. Who does he send? He sends a dove. Why does he send a dove? So our sages tell us thousands of years ago, this is the amazing thing, put on a seatbelt here. Our sages tell us thousands of years ago, what's special about a dove? A dove always sticks with its own mate. It never, once it mates with another dove, even if one of the doves dies, he will never go with another dove ever. He keeps to himself. He is reliable. They represent, right? You hear an expression till this very day. They're like two love doves. You know, doves represent love. Where do they get this from? This is from our sages thousands of years ago. In fact, it's written in the tractate of Eruvin, page 100, side 2. It says that if the Torah was never, God forbid, given, we would learn sexual behavior and modesty and not only modesty and not only sexual behavior, but also to be reliable, to be honest and reliable. We would learn this from the dove if the Torah was never given, because they are always reliable. You could trust them, that they will never, once they have their mate, they never go beyond their boundaries. They're always keeping to themselves, even if one of them has passed away. An amazing thing. So you know what? When I heard this specialness about the dove, that's why Noach sends the dove, because the dove represents sexual modest behavior, and therefore he sends, and the dove comes up with the olive, which also represents the same idea. Amazing. 1 + 1 = 2. But listen to this. I was thinking, wow, you know, how did our sages, how were they so brazen to come up with such a statement? I mean, how much of the world were they aware of? This is at a time where many of the shores have not been, continents had not been discovered even. So how could they come up with such a brazen statement to tell us that the dove is faithful, represents sexual faithfulness? How could they come and say that? It seems like they're opening themselves up to being proven wrong. So this past week, I got up on my computer and folks put on that seatbelt, second seatbelt, an amazing concept. There are 11 species. Some of them are birds, some of them are animals in the animal and bird kingdom that are faithful to their mates. Once they have a mate, they will never be unfaithful to them. They will never be unfaithful to them. And one of them I found is something called the turtle dove. It's a dove that has various purple lines on them. Turtle doves. Can you imagine this? So now today with science and high tech, we've discovered the entire world here. It's an amazing thing. What science understands today, thousands of years ago, our Jewish sages put themselves on the line here to be proven wrong, but they have divine information. Our sages were not saying what they felt. They received divine messages from God. So God, who knows the entire world before it was discovered by Columbus or others, so our sages felt confident to pass this information on. So folks, this is the tremendous lesson. The lesson in the lesson by Jacob. The lesson of Jacob in the city of Shechem, Nablus, was this miraculous oil that he used. The lesson was separation the nation of the people of Nablus wanted to become one people with the Jewish people. The Jewish response was no way. The Jewish response was oil, separation. That's how we're going to continue Jewish survival. That's how we're going to have a good influence on the nations of the world. Not by assimilating with them, not by relations with them, but by staying separate and isolated. This is how the Jewish people will also have a tremendous influence on the nations of the world. And in the time of Hanukah, what's the message? The message is, in order for the Jewish people to stay spiritually and physically alive, we must have the olive oil. The same lesson here is given. Unbelievable. That's the same lesson. By the way, it says in the book, it's written in the book Uri V'Yishi by Rabbi Jungereis. He says an amazing thing on page 636. He says if you look at the words in Hebrew of dove, Yonah, it's exactly the same letters as Yavan. Why? Because the Jewish people understood that the solution to the Greek problem and the Greek decrees was that the Jewish people had for the last 70 or 80 years, they had assimilated. They had become majority of Hellenists. There were a minority of faithful Jews that kept, but they understood the lesson. In order for us to get out, to free ourselves from the exile of the Greeks, we have to remember Yonah, which is the same letters. That is the solution to free ourselves from the exile of Greek, which happens to be the same letters. This was the first time, Rav Jungereis writes, this was the first time, on the same page, this was the first time that the Jewish people faced such a serious test. We know that, for example, at the time of Egypt, most of the Jewish people kept to themselves. Most of the Jewish people did not have relations, did not assimilate into the Egyptian culture. It wasn't part of the Egyptian exile. But this was really the first time where the Jewish people looked at a foreign nation with, wow, you know, there's a lot of things that we can learn from them. This was the first time with the average Egyptian or the average Babylonian or the average, there was much less of a pull, of a desire, of an interest. But this was different. This exile was different. There was an interest. The Greeks had a tremendous amount of technology, of high tech of their times. They had tremendous amount of wisdom, tremendous amount of philosophical giants at the time. The Jews opened up their eyes and they saw something that was very, very moshech. It really drew them in. So what's the idea? So the idea is that this was the most dangerous period of time for the Jewish people because of the fact that we looked up, we saw so many good things to learn from the Greeks, and therefore the Jewish people spiritually and of course also physically were in a tremendous danger. And therefore the solution to the problem was the oil. That's why you could say, what's the big deal? You know, they were victorious in a war. That's a big deal. What's this olive jive? You know, okay, so there have been many great people that had miracles with oil. What's the big deal? No, it is a big deal. It is a big deal because it's the whole lesson. It's the solution. Separation. That is the solution to the problem. So therefore, God created a miracle with this oil in order to teach the Jewish people the way to survive. The way to survive is oil, is the olive tree. Separates no crossbreeding. The olive oil, which does not merge with other liquids. Okay. The next events that we're going to talk about in the after Hanukkah finishes is the event of 8th day of the month of Tevet, which was 10 days ago. What happened there? There's a fast day. It's not a mandatory fast. It's brought down in 580 in the Code of Jewish Law. What happened there? The Torah was translated into the Greek language. This was in the year 245 BCE, before the Common Era. So, what's the big deal? Why is this a fast day? Why is this a tragic day? It says in our sources, in the Tractate of Sofrim, it says there that when the Torah was translated, 5 books of Moses was translated into Greek, this was a day that there was darkness in the world for 3 days. What's the problem here? Well, what was so terrible? This was a day that's similar to the sin of the calf. Well, hey, what's going on over here? What's the big deal over here? In fact, listen to this. Josephus, in his book, he says the following, that when the Torah was translated into Greek, this was a tremendous sanctification of God's name. Woo! Our sages didn't say that at all. But Josephus, that's what he says. And in fact, he points out that the king Ptolemy of Egypt, who was the coercer, he forced the Jewish people to translate it. He had a lot of tremendous respect for the Jewish people. What could be better than this? We translate, we show our Torah to the nations of the world. They could receive the benefits of our Torah. They become enlightened. And so Josephus looks at it as a sanctification of God's name. And the king of Egypt, who ordered the translation, he has a respect for the Jewish people. So what's so bad over here? Listen to this. We're going to go over about 6 or 7 opinions here. What was the tragedy? You know what? Before we go into the opinions, let me tell you what the tragedy is all about. The tragedy is that as long as you have no connection, you have nothing to talk about, you have nothing in common with the guy next to you or the girl next to you, you're separate. You will keep the Jewish tradition. When do we face problems? When do we face spiritual and physical dangers? Once there's a common ground, there's a common denominator. So the fact is, folks, that once the tragedy here was that once the Torah was translated into Greek, there was now something in common that we had with the Greeks. So look how history works. If you look on the historical timeline, the translation transpired in the year 245 BCE. The movement of Hellenism, of Jewish Hellenists, took off 45 years later, in the year 200. So after the Torah is translated, this opened up the floodgate to tremendous assimilation. Due to what? The translation of the Torah. Why? Up until that point, we had nothing in common. We have no common language with the nations of the world, with the Greeks. We have nothing to talk about. But now they have our Torah. So there's something we could start talking about. Hey, a Greek comes up to us. Can I ask you a few questions? I saw some laws which I really don't understand. I'm very interested, curious to find out. Okay, sure. Have a seat. Have a seat. You know, Caesar. And we have a seat. And, you know, we were not able to finish the conversation. Why don't we, tomorrow, we'll meet at the restaurant down the block. Okay. And we'll continue discussing the Bible or the Torah. And that's how the relations began to roll. Once you have a common denominator, you have a common denominator being the Torah in their language now. Now we have something to speak about. That was the beginning of the assimilation. Our sages caught the point that this was the beginning of the end. So we'll read a few of the opinions of our sages. Why was this such a tragedy? why was it such a tragedy? According to the Maharal writes that, listen to this amazing thing, exactly what we said. Part of the Greek fighting to try to have us forget the Torah, this was part of the battle, which means translating the Torah into Greek was really behind the mask of, oh, we're just interested, to receive the light and to receive the wisdom of the Torah. No, the Maharal tells us a tremendous secret here. The real reason why the Gentiles, the Greeks, wanted to translate the Torah into Greek, because this was part of the battle to have the Jewish people forget the Torah, not to strengthen the Torah. This was part of the same battle 100 years later in the time of Hanukah. Hanukah was about 135. This was 245. So we're talking about this was part of that battle, which later Jews were not allowed to learn Torah 100 years later. This is the same exact battle. It's just with a mask on. It's just a different way to spin it. It's a different type of spin. And he goes on that the closeness and the relations that were a result of the translating of the Torah, this was the main cause of the Jews forgetting the Torah. Can you imagine that? This was the main cause. The translating of the Torah, which created a closeness, which created a common denominator between us and the nations, this led to the forgetting of the Torah by the Jewish people. Next, amazing thing. Zmanei Reuven says, look at this. We know that the exile of Greece is represented by darkness. If you take the word in Hebrew, choshech, and you spin it around, it comes to the word shachach, forgot. So what was the darkness of, when the Torah was translated, for the next 3 days, the world was in darkness. What does that mean? Darkness in Hebrew is the same letters as forget. The Jewish people, this was their bullet. This was their strategy in war to bring down the Jewish people. And they translated the Torah, which would lead to relations, which would lead to a common denominator. And so therefore that led to the Torah. So think about it. You have 245, the Torah being translated, and 45 years later you have the tremendous movement of Hellenism that took over the Jewish people. All thank the translation of the Torah. Listen to this. Rav Reuven Margaliot, in his book Dvarim B'itam, page 172, he says an amazing concept. There are some well-intentioned souls that want to expand. When you would eat a sacrifice, it would have to be within certain boundaries. So there are certain well-intentioned people, he said, that they want to expand the boundaries of holiness. What's the problem? When you go past the boundaries of holiness, when you expand and you go past them, you're out of the boundaries already. That allows, once you've crossed over and you want to extend, so to speak, holiness beyond its boundaries, you are unfortunately allowing the outside to come inside. Ho! Check that one out. You are the borders, which were very, very clear, where you could eat this sacrifice up until this mark. What happens when that mark no longer exists? When that mark has been erased, you can't see it anymore. So that allows the outside to come on in to the inside. And that's why one of the reasons that one of the first things that the Greeks did when they took over the temple was there were signs in all kinds of languages that from here on the nations of the world cannot travel in the Holy Temple Mount. That's bothered them. They wanted to remove all types of borders between them and the Jewish people. So that's what happens. When you start removing borders, then the border comes into you. Yeah, the border becomes wherever now where you are. So the outside comes into the inside. And he says when the Torah was translated into Greek, then also part of the Greek culture came into the Torah. So some of the Torah came into the Greeks, and some parts of the Greek culture came into the Jewish Torah. That's what happens when we don't stay separate. And he goes on and on, beautiful stuff. It's worthwhile to see it. He says when we lived in Berlin, in Germany, people wanted to have the Torah translated into German, and they saw nothing wrong with that. What they didn't realize is once you translate the Torah into a certain language, what you receive in return is all that culture comes in. All the German culture began once we agreed to translate the Torah into German. Then we have all the German culture that comes into us and assimilates us. Listen to this, an amazing, in the book by Rav Yoel Schwartz on Hanukah, page 34, tells us an amazing concept here. That the Jews of the land of Israel, they wanted to learn the language in order to jive and to assimilate with the Greeks. So what would they do? When they wanted to learn Torah, they would make sure that they would use books in Greek in order to improve their language, and that's how they would learn the Torah. So now we're not learning any longer Torah in its original language, which is the Holy Tongue Hebrew. Now they were specifically, in order to come closer to the Greeks, they would learn it in the Greek language. In Egypt, where also the Greeks ruled, in southern part of Israel, in Egypt, the people there, the Rav Schwartz brings down sources, they would, in order to, once again, to improve the Jews, in order to improve their Greek language, so instead of learning Torah, they would use these books as language books, like 101 for dummies or languages for dummies. So they used not as to learn from, not to become spiritually, improved. They would use this as a way to learn and to come closer to the Greeks, which is really an amazing thing. We know that it is written in, I don't have it right here, but it's written that Moses, here I got it now, in Yalkut Shimoni, the prophet Hosea, the 8th chapter. Listen to this amazing thing. Moses wanted to have the Torah translated. Moses wanted to have the oral Torah translated and written down. He wanted to have it not translated, to have it written down. And Hashem said, no, we're not going to write it down. Why? Because at the end of days, when I come to redeem my children, the Jewish people, I'm going to say, whoever has the Torah, they're my children. And all these nations are going to wave and say, we have the Torah. So who do we know? Will the real Jewish people stand up? Because everybody has the Torah. It's been translated into all these languages. So Hashem says, you know what? Only those that have my secrets, will be redeemed. And what is the secrets of Torah? The secrets of the Torah is the oral law, which was not written down. The Torah was destroyed. The 5 books of Moses, or the prophets, they were destroyed. The fact that they were translated. In fact, the non-Jewish world began to use the translations to prove that they were the new Israel, or they were the true religion. Amazing. They take our Torah, which was translated into their language, and now they start bringing us proofs from that same Torah that they are the new Israel, or they are the chosen people, etc. This is an amazing concept. It's all backwards. So Hashem says, you know, whoever has my secrets, those are my children. And listen to this beautiful idea, that this is brought down by the Tzalach book on page 12. This is by Rav Landau, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, in his famous book called Tzalach. Listen to what he says. He writes the following. He says, the word tractate, Masechet, what does that mean? It means a barrier. Masecha. When a person puts on a mask, that's in order not to recognize me. So HaKadosh, the God, his intention was that all these tractates would be a separation between us and the nations. This was the Torah that the nations did not have a hand on. And this were the secrets of the Torah. And the Khatam Sofer has an amazing idea. He writes there that the secrets of Torah were handed over to the Jewish people when? After the miracle of Hanukah. The secrets of Torah represent, the oral Torah is represented by the holiday of Hanukah. Of course, it's not a Torah holiday. It's a rabbinical, it's an oral law. And that's the idea here, that once the Torah was translated, the written law was translated, that brought the downfall of the Jewish people. Okay, next step. Oh, one more here. Rabbi Beryl Wine, the historian, he writes the following. He brings down, the day when the Torah was written in Greek was an unfortunate for Israel, was as fortunate as the day of the golden calf. This is Masechet Sofrim, chapter 1, paragraph 7. They even combined this event with two tragedies, the death of Ezra and the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem, and made it a public fast day. Perhaps the reason was because they saw that the translation would open the door for usurpers and new religions claiming to supplant or succeed the Torah. Our sages, beautiful, they understood that this would be used, the Torah would be used for them to prove, so to speak, it's such a crazy idea, but that's what they do with our Torah. At the same time, the translation gave a dangerous stamp of approval to the Greek language and culture. This allowed Greek culture and values to enter the Jewish world. From the time of the Septuagint onward, it was very hard to draw a line and say, we are going to take this amount of Greek culture, but we're not going to take the rest. What is going to happen is that they are going to take the rest. They are going to become more Greek than the Greeks, which is what happened which is a Jewish trait. The Jews were super Germans, super socialists, and are super Americans because the burden is upon them to prove themselves. Here too, the burden will be upon them to prove themselves more Greek, and they will indeed out-Greeks the Greeks. This was the fallout from the translation of the Torah. That was the 8th. So once again, folks, the Greeks are using the Torah to use it as a bridge, as a connection to the Jewish people in order to assimilate. It's a different face of the same battle to destroy the Jewish people. Now they have the Torah, now we have common ground, now we have a common denominator. This is the beginning of the assimilation of the Jewish people. So that was the idea. The idea was to assimilate the Jewish people. That was why, as the Maral says, that's why they wanted to translate it. Then we have the 9th. What's the 9th? The 9th of Tevet, we have according to one opinion in 580, the Code of Jewish Law. It's written there that this was the birthday of JC, of Yeshu, which is an amazing thing. What's the idea? Who is this guy? Who is this guy, JC? JC, more than any other figure, look what he did. As a Jew, look what he did to the Torah. He used our Torah, which was translated. He uses it to prove the Christians used the Bible, used the prophets to prove, quote unquote, Christianity. To prove Christianity. So therefore, we see that here's how it works. We have the year 245 when the Torah is translated into Greek. 50 years later, in the year 200, we have the assimilation is beginning due to the fact, thank you for translating the Torah, due to the fact that now we have a common denominator. We have a common language with the nations of the world. The Torah has been watered down. They're using it as a proof against us. That was in the year the Hellenist movement begins. The Jewish people are almost destroyed spiritually with all this Hellenism. Until 135 BCE, the story of the miraculous story of Hanukah with the oil, separation, separate ourselves from the nations of the world. This is the solution. And then we have 130 years later, we have JC coming to it. We have JC coming to the front over here. Now, what's with him? So he proves that he's the Messiah from where? From all places, from our Torah. It was so bad that there was a need for our sages to create a 19th blessing. The Amidah had 18, but in the time of the early Christians, they were so dangerous to the Jewish people spiritually and also physically that there was a special blessing to have these Christians destroyed because of what they were doing to the Jewish people, the destruction that they made. If you look in the uncensored Rambam, amazing, look in the uncensored Rambam. The Rambam writes that the prophets spoke about bringing the Jewish people back to the land of Israel, to redeem the Jewish people. That was the prophecy. And here, more than any other person, here we go. Look it up in the Laws of the Kings, chapter 11, Law 4. So the idea of the prophets was to save the Jewish people, to gather them from the exiles, and to strengthen commandments. And look at JC, look at Yeshu, look what he did. He was the antithesis, he was the exact opposite. He caused the Jewish people to become destroyed by the sword. And he caused the Jewish people, with his false religion, he caused the Jewish people to be dispersed amongst all the nations. He caused the Torah to be forgotten. He caused the world, the majority of the world, up until now with the Muslims that are coming very, very close to taking over it soon. The population of the Muslims will soon take over the population of the Christians because of all the kids that they're having. But he, more than any other figure, he led astray. He led the world astray to worship foreign idols, avodah zarah, idol worshipping, himself, of course. So this is an amazing thing. So this is the same idea. So we have the Torah being translated on the 8th into Greeks. Now the Greeks claim that they're the new Israel. And 150 years later, now we have the Christians. They're the new Israel. They're the new Israel. And JC, who's created more tragedy in the world than any other figure, leading people off the way, leading people to hate the Jewish people, to fight against the Jewish people, to destroy the Jewish people. That was on the 9th day. What happened on the 10th day? On the 10th day we are told, according to the book, according to the book, the Kolbo, on the laws of Hanukah, he says an amazing thing. He says, you know what happened on the 10th day? What happened on the 10th day was that Ezra the scribe passed away. Ezra the scribe passed away. This is an amazing thing. Why? Because it tells us in Esther Rabbah, chapter 7, paragraph 11, it says that Haman, the wicked Haman, gotta erase his name there, the wicked Haman, he looked at all the months to see which was the month that was the best month to kill the Jewish people, who did not have Jewish merit. And he looked in the months, and then he came to the month of Tevet, which is the month that we're in right now. And he looked at it and he said, I can't touch the Jewish people during Tevet. You know why? Because that's when Ezra Sofer, that's when he really came to the land of Israel in this month. And the first thing that he did, he separated the Jews from the non-Jews. The Jews were married, they were assimilated, they were married with non-Jews. The first act that he did, according to the book of Ezra, chapter 10, verse 17, this is what he did. He separated the nations. He separated the Jews from the nations of the world that they had assimilated into. Therefore, this month has tremendous merit. It has the merit of that deed. It has the merit of Ezra, who stood up and he understood that to save the Jewish people, separation, oil, olives, that's the idea. So, folks, this is an amazing line. Our title today was the spiritual connection between Xmas and Hanukah. Is it? Are they connected? Of course they're all connected. That's why almost every year Xmas and Hanukah come together. Why? Because the antidote, the solution to Xmas, to be saved, to be redeemed, the idea is Hanukah. And Hanukah represents the Jewish people separating themselves from the nations of the world. Hanukah represents olive oil, which never merges with any other liquids. That is the idea. And therefore, check out this beautiful idea. How long does a holiday last for? Well, you look in the calendar, it lasts a day, 2 days, not so. Spiritually speaking, this is brought down in many, many books. The days of the holiday is the amount of time that the spiritual light, spiritual benefit continues. So if you do the math, it's an amazing thing. Hanukkah is 8 days. If you do 8 more days after Hanukkah finishes, what does that include? It includes the fast of the 8th, when the Torah was translated, which led to assimilation. It includes the 9th of Tevet, which is the birth of JC, which brought up upon the total annihilation of the Jewish people, both spiritually and also physically, until this very, very minute. There's millions and billions of dollars that go in to today by the Christians in order to try to influence Jews, all types of Jews, to come over to their side, to spiritually annihilate the Jewish people. Sometimes they do it via battle, sometimes war, sometimes they do it through love and support for Israel. So this is an amazing thing. So this was the 9th, and the last day that there's an influence of Hanukkah on the next coming 8 days after the holiday is finished is the 10th, and that is represented by the fact that Ezra understood that in order to bring salvation to the Jewish people, first thing was, before even the building of the temple, the first thing that had to be done was to separate the Jews from the non-Jews. They were intermarried, they were assimilated. That was the first step in order to be successful. So yes, the holiday of Hanukkah continues 8 days after that to include, and it's the solution of the 8th, it's the solution of the 9th, and it's the solution of 10th, segregation, separating ourselves. And that's why, that is the real reason why, that these two holidays come always back to back, always together, almost every single year, to teach us the lesson that in order to eliminate the influence of the holiday on the Jewish people, what is needed is the lesson of Hanukkah to continue, and the separation, segregation from the nations of the world.